Good morning. Today is Thursday, July 20th, 2023. The practice of Ashkenazim is from Rosh Chodesh Av, the first day of the month of Av, which was yesterday. Today's the second. The restrictions of mourning, of Avelus, intensify. So in these days, we do not eat any meat or chicken. We do not drink wine except on Shabbos. For Sfardim, these restrictions start this coming Saturday night. But what if, Mazel Tov, a baby was born last week, a baby boy, and the bris falls during the 9 days? Of course, not on Tisha B'Av, but the 9 days where we are now. What if there would be a bris today? And at a bris, a celebratory meal is part of the mitzvah of bris, of ritual circumcision. It's called a seudas mitzvah, the meal which is a mitzvah. It is a positive commandment to have this celebration. And a seudas mitzvah overrides mourning. And at such a meal, they can and should serve meat and wine at that meal. There's another seudas mitzvah that calls for meat and wine during these days, a siyum, the celebration of the completion of the study of the book of the Torah or a volume of the Talmud. The joy of accomplishment in Torah learning, it's a celebration. And that celebration and the meal that celebrates it overrides laws of mourning and can and should. One can and should serve meat and wine at a seudas mitzvah of a siyum. And not only the individual, let's say the family members of the baby who's having the bris, or for a siyum, the individual who did the actual learning, but everyone who is present in person, right? This is one of the things that came up during COVID. For this, it doesn't help to be on Zoom. But everyone who is present in person also shares in the meat and the wine of this meal, because we all share in the joy of the mitzvah of the bris, or the joy of the Torah accomplishment of any one of us. It's a Yom Tov, it's a holiday for everybody present. In recent years, there has arisen a trend that is very upsetting. Now, it started with summer camps, Jewish summer camps, having a 9 days siyum. Let's leave that to the side for now. But it has become prevalent in some places to have a 9 days siyum in restaurants. So, for example, there's at least one restaurant. I'm not going to mention the name of the restaurant because I'm not certain that it is continuing this year. I didn't have a chance to verify it. If it was continuing, I would mention the restaurant, but let's just say it's one of the most famous upper-end steakhouse restaurants in Manhattan. And what they do is they put out an advertisement that says, "We are pleased to inform our guests that we will host a siyum every evening of the 9 days, and it will take place at such and such a time. And for reservations, please call the number." So you make a reservation in this restaurant, you go to the restaurant, somebody makes a siyum on the completion of a volume of the Talmud. Whether they actually studied that volume in depth or they read it through like the newspaper, I'm not going to comment on. That's not my purpose right now. I have suspicions about that part of it, but leaving that aside. But the question is that permitted according to Jewish law to hold a siyum in a restaurant during the 9 days so that strangers, customers, can eat meat and drink wine? And the answer to that question is no. It's not permissible. It's not permissible because these laws of mourning are not just technicalities that can be overridden at will. They reflect a reality that this is a period of mourning, of sadness. The reason we do not eat meat or drink wine, it's not the technical issue of not eating a certain food. It is to bring about a feeling that we are in mourning for Jerusalem, for the Beis Hamikdash, for the Jewish people. Yes, it is true. When there is a genuine Seudas mitzvah, when there is a bris, for example, or a siyum of someone who did not intentionally make it this time just in order to be able to have some meat, but legitimately finished, and you legitimately have a connection to this person and you are celebrating, yes, of course, that sets aside the laws of mourning. Just like a person sitting Shiva, the laws of Shabbos set aside some of the laws of mourning. But the Mishnah Berurah says, we need to remember that there is a chovos halavavos of mourning. There is duties of the heart. The outer actions are to lead to the mood that we are to have. And the Mishnah Berurah says, Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim, written by Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan of Radin in the early 1900s, he writes, who is allowed to attend a siyum during the 9 days and therefore be able to eat meat and drink wine? Only a person who would have attended otherwise if it was some other time. Meaning a person that is a family member, a relative, a friend, someone who knows the person, someone who could say, I am happy, I am sharing the joy of your accomplishment. A stranger, someone I don't know, makes a siyum? That does not allow a person to eat meat or drink wine. And besides the fact that it's wrong, is the destruction of the temple and the exile of the Jewish people not sufficiently serious to be able just to eat dairy for a few days? It's 9 days, minus Tisha B'Av, where we're not eating anyway, minus Shabbos, when you can eat whatever you want. So that's 7 days. I mean, do you really need to find a way to get around dairy or part of food for 7 days? I mean, is your biggest problem which dairy restaurant to choose? Even in Montreal, if you chose a different dairy restaurant every night, you'd still be able to have a different meal every night just sushi and pizza. That takes up 2 nights. And then there's lasagna, and then there's, it's not such a big deal. As our rabbis say, Kedai hu sreifas beis Elokeinu, it's sufficient. It's enough. The destruction of the Holy Temple, the destruction of Jerusalem, the dispersal of Jewish people, to be just a little bit inconvenienced to have to decide which dairy meal am I going to have tonight. So it's not just wrong, it's disappointing. It's sad that some people feel that they have to do such a thing. But everything has its time and place. So I want to share with you a remarkable story about an earlier time, the 1920s in Israel, when the Jews there lived with great deprivation. And it was, in fact, hard to find enough dairy food to sustain people for these days. Nothing like today when we have to choose between which dairy restaurant we're going to. So this is a story of a man named Avraham Mavrach. He was a founding member of Poel Mizrachi, which was established in 1922 in Israel for religious pioneers in the land of Israel. And one of the first things that they did is they opened kosher kitchens for new immigrants and workers, because those who were religious could not eat in the existing kitchens. Histadrut had opened kitchens for workers and immigrants, but they were not kosher. They did not observe Shabbos. So those who were religious, who kept kosher, they had nowhere to eat. Avraham later wrote in a newspaper, the religious pioneers suffered greatly. They could not afford to eat in a restaurant and enjoy a hot meal. And on Shabbos, they missed the Jewish atmosphere of holiness. Therefore, we established the kitchens of Poel Mizrahi to provide the religious workers with inexpensive and tasty meals, and also to serve as a social center. The workers would read, they had Torah classes, they would sing and dance on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And it's not surprising that these kosher kitchens also attracted many non-religious workers. The issue was that the meat, the portion, the dishes and the soups that they made with meat were a necessary staple at that time for those hungry workers. And then they came to the 9 days. And they had a real problem. So the administrators of the Jerusalem branch of this kosher kitchen met to try to find an alternative for the meat meals for the 9 days. And they were unable to come up with appropriate substitutes. So they thought, we're just going to have to close this kitchen until after Tisha B'Av. There's no way that we can operate. But Avraham Mavrach refused to allow that to be the conclusion. And he said, we should ask the chief rabbis. We should ask the Rabbanut. Maybe they'll find a heter, a leniency that will allow us to be able to serve meat, at least to those people who are coming who would otherwise eat non-kosher. Those people who are committed to keeping kosher, and they're also not going to eat meat during the 9 days. So, it's going to be difficult, but for a few days they'll manage somehow, but they're committed to it. But the people that are now coming to our kosher kitchen who were otherwise eating non-kosher, maybe we'll find some legitimate reason, a leniency to allow them to eat. And the other people at the meeting laughed at him. He said, are you crazy? The Rabbanut, the chief rabbis, in Yerushalayim HaKodesh, the holy city of Jerusalem, you think they're going to allow a kosher establishment to serve meat in the 9 days? You're crazy. And none of them would even go with Avraham to the office of the rabbis. Okay, so on the first day of Av in that year, he went by himself to the office of the Rabbanut, the chief rabbis, in Jerusalem. He came to the office. The secretary refused to let him in because the secretary said, the rabbis are in a meeting, they cannot be disturbed. Avraham says, but this is urgent. I'm a representative of Poel Mizrahi, and I have to see the rabbis, and it's got to be now. So finally, Rabbi Shmuel Weber, who was the chief secretary of the Rabbanut, he came out of the meeting and he asked Avraham what the problem was. It's so urgent. You need to speak to someone. What's the issue? Avraham explained the question to him. So Rabbi Weber said, well, listen, here's a solution. Arrange for a siyum every night at the kosher kitchen, and then you'll be allowed to eat meat. Avraham said it's impossible. First of all, it's already the first of Av. We don't have people who are just about to finish a volume of the Talmud. I mean, it takes a long time to be able to make a siyum. You can't just do it on the spot. That's an impossible solution. Rabbi Weber said, wait here a moment, and he goes back into the meeting with the rabbis. A few minutes later, Rabbi Weber comes out and says to Avraham, come inside. Avraham comes inside, and he sees the chief rabbi and the other rabbis, but the chief rabbi, Rabbi Avraham Kook, the first chief rabbi of Israel. And he's sitting with the other rabbis. So he says to Avraham, come closer. Please explain what the situation is. What is your question that you want to ask? So Avraham, first of all, was very nervous to be talking to Rav Kook, one of the greatest Torah leaders, not only at that time, but in modern history. But he explains the purpose of the kitchen and the great benefit that it serves for the religious workers and also the benefit for those workers who would have eaten non-kosher but they're coming now to eat kosher. And what are we going to do in the 9 days? And we don't have a substitute for the meat. And so Rav Kook sank into deep thought for a few minutes. And then he said to Avram, do you really think that some of the workers who eat at your kosher kitchen will end up going to a non-kosher kitchen if your kitchen is closed in the 9 days? And Avram said, yeah, for sure, because they were eating there before. So they have no problem eating the non-kosher. If we close, for sure they're going to eat non-kosher. So Rav Kook said, if that's the case, then your kitchen is serving a seudas mitzvah, a meal in celebration of a mitzvah, and everyone can eat meat. Now, Avraham was stunned. He couldn't move. It's like he was frozen. So Rav Kook smiled at him and said, do you have another question you want to ask? So Avram said, Rebbe, just a second. I just want to make sure I understand what you said. You're saying that everyone can eat meat there? The non-religious workers, I understand. But you mean even the religious workers can eat there? And Rav Kook said, yes, everyone can eat there. Even those people who are religious who would not be tempted to eat non-kosher if this kitchen was closed. Yes, everyone can eat meat because this is a seudas mitzvah. Now, later, Rabbi Tzvi Kaplan wrote an article to analyze this unusual decision of Rav Kook. And of course, it's only because it was Rav Kook that none of the other rabbis in the room disagree with him, because it doesn't seem on its face to be the correct ruling. Because, okay, for the workers who were eating non-kosher, and now the question is, either we serve them meat or they're going to eat non-kosher food. The answer to that is pretty clear. It's obvious. Not having meat during the 9 days is a rabbinic practice. Eating non-kosher food is a biblical prohibition. Of course, we would waive the rabbinic practice in order not to violate the biblical prohibition of non-kosher food. But how is it that Rav Kook allowed the religious workers to eat meat in this kitchen? They weren't going to eat non-kosher food. So Rav Kaplan explained the reasoning of Rav Kook is that at a seudas mitzvah during the 9 days, like a bris, for example, as I said before, we don't allow only, let's say, the parents of the baby to eat meat. We allow everyone who is there to eat meat, because everyone who is there is sharing in the joy at a siyum, a legitimate siyum of the completion of a volume of the Torah. We don't just allow the person who makes the siyum, who did the learning, to have meat. We allow everyone who's there, legitimately who have a connection to that person. Because it's a celebration for everyone who's present. And Rav Kook reasoned, every Jew is responsible to make sure that another Jew eats kosher food. So a meal that accomplishes this goal, that Jews who would otherwise eat non-kosher food are now eating kosher food, that is a seudas mitzvah. That is a meal that is a celebration of the fulfillment of a mitzvah of everyone who is there. And therefore, Rav Kook permitted everyone present to eat, because the meal they were serving was in fact a seudas mitzvah. So a restaurant today that has a 9-day siyum, the answer is no. But keeping Jews connected to Judaism when that is actually the case, from the vantage point of Rav Kook, that was a mitzvah for everyone to celebrate. My friends, I wish you a great day, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.